She was forced to give up the man she was promised to her younger sister and sent away to marry a quiet farmer instead. But on the day everything fell apart, the farmer they laughed at turned out to be the wealthiest man any of them had ever seen. If you have ever been overlooked by the people who were supposed to love you most, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because the last 5 minutes will change the way you see everything. Captain Gerald Hartwell had spent 31 years on the Nashville Police Department. He had a chest full of commendations, a reputation that made younger officers straighten their backs when he walked into a room, and a voice that could silence a crowded precinct without raising a single decibel. He was the kind of man people described as solid, dependable, a pillar. What they did not know, what most people never saw, was the quiet war happening inside the walls of his house on Ridgewood Lane. His wife Diana had been the most alive person Gerald had ever met. She was a black woman from Clarksville, Tennessee, with a laugh that filled every corner of a room and a heart that never seemed to run out of room for more people. She had loved Gerald completely, and he had loved her back fiercely, genuinely, in the way young men love before the world teaches them to be ashamed of things. They had 2 daughters together. Eleanor came first. She was 26 years old now, and she had her mother's face entirely, the deep brown skin, the wide dark eyes, the quiet way of carrying herself that made people either overlook her or never forget her. There was no in-between with Eleanor Hartwell. Cassandra came 2 years later. She was 24, and she had Gerald's coloring, pale skin, light eyes, her father's sharp jaw softened into something that people called pretty. She had learned very early in life that her father looked at her differently than he looked at Eleanor. Not with more love, exactly, with more ease, with less discomfort, with the particular warmth of a man who saw himself reflected back. Diana had noticed it. She never said it out loud in a way that caused a fight, but she had noticed, and before she died of a sudden cardiac event 3 years ago at the age of 54, she had made 2 promises. One daughter would marry into the Calloway family, old Appalachian money, farming land that stretched across 3 counties in eastern Tennessee, a family that had been quietly, almost invisibly wealthy for 2 generations. The other would marry Nathan Reeves, the son of a woman named Margaret Reeves who had once pulled baby Eleanor out of a car accident when Diana was alone on a back road and the ambulance was 47 minutes away. Margaret had held that infant and kept her breathing until help arrived. Diana never forgot it. She made Gerald promise. He agreed, the way men agree to things when the person asking them is dying. Then Diana was gone, and Gerald was left alone with 2 daughters and a promise he had never fully intended to keep. One Thursday evening in October, he called Eleanor into his study. The room smelled like gun oil and old coffee. Eleanor sat across from him, in the chair that had always felt too large, the one her mother used to curl up in with a book. Gerald did not look at her directly when he spoke. He told her the plan. Eleanor would marry into the Calloway family. Cassandra would marry Nathan Reeves. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. She was not surprised. She was never surprised by her father anymore. She only nodded slowly and said, "All right, Daddy." Before he could say anything else, the door opened. Cassandra walked in without knocking. She had a way of entering rooms like she had already been invited. She looked between her father and her sister, read the air immediately, and folded her arms. "What is going on?" Gerald repeated the plan. Cassandra stared at him. Then she laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind that comes out when something is so offensive it bypasses anger entirely. "You cannot be serious," she said. "I am." Her face changed. The lightness dropped away and something harder took its place. "There is no version of this," she said, "where Eleanor gets the Calloway family and I get sent to some farm in the middle of nowhere." Gerald frowned. "Watch your tone." Cassandra stepped further into the room. Her voice rose just enough to fill it. "You have always done this. You act like everything has to be fair and equal, but it never is. Eleanor gets the better deal every single time." "That is not true," Gerald said. But his voice had already softened. Eleanor heard it. She always heard it. That particular softening that happened whenever Cassandra pushed. Cassandra returned to Eleanor then. Her eyes were bright and cold at the same time. "Tell him," she said. Tell him you do not even want the Calloway family. Tell him you are fine going to the farm." Eleanor looked at her sister. She said nothing. Cassandra's jaw tightened. "Fine. I will say it then." She turned back to Gerald. "Eleanor cannot give any man children. You know that. So why are you sending her to a family that will expect an heir? You are setting her up to fail. You are setting all of us up for embarrassment." The room went completely still. Eleanor felt the words land the way. They always landed like something blunt dropped from a height. She had known this about herself for 3 years. After the accident that had also taken her mother, after the surgery, after the doctor's quiet and careful explanation. She had never spoken about it publicly. Cassandra had found out through a medical document she had no business reading, and she had filed it away, waiting. Eleanor's voice was very quiet when she spoke. "You did not have to say that. Was it a lie?" Cassandra asked. Gerald stood up. But Cassandra was not finished. She was crying now, real tears, the kind she had always been able to produce at exactly the right moment. She picked up the letter opener from Gerald's desk, and her hand was shaking. "If you do not change this," she said, "I swear to God I will hurt myself. I mean it. I am not going to that farm. I am not going to be the one left behind again." Gerald looked at his younger daughter. Then he looked at Eleanor. And Eleanor already knew. She had known since she was 9 years old, and Cassandra had cried her way into getting Eleanor's bedroom because it had a better window. She had known since she was 16, and a boy named Marcus had stopped walking her home after Cass and retold him Eleanor thought she was too good for him. She had known every single time. Gerald said quietly, "All right. Cassandra will marry into the Calloway family. Eleanor will go to the Reeves farm." Cassandra lowered the letter opener, wiped her eyes, lifted her chin. Eleanor looked at her father for a long moment. Then she looked at her sister. "You win," she said, "as always." Cassandra's lips curved. "As I should." Eleanor stood up. Her voice did not shake. "Go ahead and take the Calloway family. I will go to the farm. But do not come to me later when it falls apart." Cassandra laughed softly. "I will never regret choosing the better life." Eleanor said nothing else. She turned and walked out of the room. She packed that night. No one helped her. No one apologized. By morning, a single bag sat by the front door. The drive out of Nashville took 2 hours. Then the road became narrower. Then it became rough. Then the driver stopped and told her the car could not go further. Eleanor stood on the side of a Tennessee back road with a suitcase that felt heavier than it should have. The October air was cold and sharp. The trees on either side were turning orange and deep reddened the particular gold that only lasts about 4 days before it falls. She stood there for a moment. Just stood. Then a voice called out from down the road, "You must be Eleanor." She turned. The woman walking toward her was in her late 50s, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots, with silver hair pulled back and the kind of face that had been weathered by outdoor living into something that looked less like age and more like character. "Dorothy Calloway," the woman said. "But everyone calls me Dot. I am Nate's mother." She looked at the suitcase immediately. "Lord, that thing is heavy. Let me get someone to carry it." Eleanor tried to smile. "I am fine." "You are not fine," Dot said, but not unkindly. "You look like someone who has been swallowing something sharp for a long time." That almost undid Eleanor entirely. Dot arranged for a neighbor's truck to carry the bag the rest of the way. They rode together in the cab, and Dot talked about the land, the farm, the way the valley looked in November when the first frost came down off the ridge. She did not ask Eleanor questions she was not ready to answer. She just talked the way people talk when they want you to know you are not alone without making a whole production of it. The house was not what Eleanor expected. It was old and modest, white clapboard siding, a wide porch, a vegetable garden that had been put to bed for winter. Nothing about it announced wealth. Nothing about it announced anything except that someone had lived here for a long time and taken care of it. Inside, it was clean and warm and smelled like something baking. Dot looked at her. "It is not fancy," she said, "but it is home." Eleanor nodded. "I understand." Dot set her down and made her eat before anything else. As she moved around the kitchen, she said, simply and without drama, Village life is hard. Farm life is harder. If you find you truly cannot do it, you can say so. I will not hold it against you. Eleanor looked up. There was no trap in the woman's voice. No test. Just honesty. I do not have anywhere to go back to, Eleanor said quietly. Dot stopped. Cayman sat beside her, put one hand over Eleanor's. Then from today, she said, this is your home. Eleanor looked at her. Something shifted. Not happiness yet. Not quite. But warmth. Real warmth. The kind she had not felt since her mother died. And for that moment, it was enough. She was still sitting there when she heard boots on the porch steps. Then, the front door opened. Mom, Dot turned. Nate, you are back. Eleanor looked up. The man who stepped inside was not what she had prepared herself for. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of build that came from actual physical work rather than a gym. His face was calm and clean, with dark eyes that moved around the room and settled on her without any performance. He was 31 years old and he looked it not old, just settled. Like a man who knew where he stood. He was also, she registered with some confusion, quietly and unmistakably handsome. This is Eleanor, Dot said. Nate stepped forward. His voice was low. I am sorry I was not there to meet you. Work ran long. Eleanor stood quickly. It is fine. He shook his head slightly. It is not, but thank you for saying so. Then he reached into the bag he had come in with and set a small box on the table in front of her. I picked this up for you, he said. I was not sure of your taste, so I brought a couple of options. Eleanor looked at the box. She opened it carefully. Inside was a gold bracelet. Not costume jewelry, not the kind of thing you bought at a mall. Real gold, heavy and warm minus colored, with a simple design that managed to look both expensive and understated. She stared at it. You do not like it, Nate said immediately. That is fine. I have another. He reached back into the bag and produced a second case. Eleanor opened it. Inside was a piece set with a pink diamond. She did not know the technical name for the cut. She knew enough to know that what she was looking at cost more than most people's cars. She raised her head slowly. Dot was smiling. Nate was watching her with an expression that was patient and slightly uncertain. Like a man who genuinely could not tell if he had done something right. I do not understand, Eleanor said. Nate's sat down across from her. You expected poor people, he said. It was not a judgment, just a fact. Eleanor felt he tries in her face. I did not mean. It is all right, he said. Most people do. She looked around the modest room again, then back at the gold, then back at him. How, she said carefully, does a farmer afford this? Dot answered before Nate could. My son farms a great deal of land. How much land? Dot waved her hand. Across several counties, this farm for others. Plus the livestock operation, the fish farming, the tourism development up on the ridge. And some other investments. Some other investments, Eleanor repeated. Nate nodded. Farming is only one part. She looked at him directly. How much do you make? She expected him to deflect. He did not. Dot said, from crops alone, we are talking about several $100 million a year. Some years more. Eleanor sat very still. She looked at the modest kitchen, the old porch, the clapboard siding. Then she looked at Nate. If you have this kind of money, she said, why do you live here? Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my father built this house himself. Every board of it. He died 8 years ago and my mother did not want to leave. I did not want to leave her here alone. He said it without any attempt to make it sound noble. Just the truth. Dot smiled. The particular smile of a woman who has been loved well by her son and knows it. Eleanor looked around the room again, this time differently. Not as a sign of poverty, as a sign of memory, as a sign of love. Nate continued. If you want something larger, I can build it. There is land on the south side of the property. It would not take long. Eleanor shook her head. There is no need. He studied her face. You are sure? Yes. Something in his expression settled. Dot stood up. I will give you to a moment. She left them in the kitchen. The silence was not uncomfortable. That surprised Eleanor. After a while, Nate said, "You still look like you are waiting for the other shoe to drop." Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I suppose I am." He did not rush to fill the silence. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "Nobody is chasing you here." Eleanor looked up. He meant it. She could tell. "Nobody is chasing you here." She let out a breath she had been holding since she left Nashville. That night, Dot insisted on a sleeping arrangement that left both Nate and Eleanor equally embarrassed and equally unable to argue their way out of it. The room was warm. The bed was wide. Nate placed a pillow down the center without comment. Eleanor looked at it. "You do not trust yourself?" she asked before she could stop herself. Nate looked at her, then a quiet laugh. "I trust myself fine," he said. "I just do not want you to think I am trying anything." She turned to face the ceiling. "I did not say you were." "No," he agreed. "But I know we just met." A pause. "And you are not exactly easy to ignore." Eleanor turned her head toward him sharply. Nate was looking at the ceiling now, as if he had not quite meant to say it out loud. He cleared his throat. "I mean, you are very beautiful. So I would rather be careful." Eleanor did not know whether to laugh or hide her face. She had not been called beautiful in a long time. Not like that. Not simply, with nothing attached to it. She spoke after a while, still facing away. "At least you are honest." He smiled in the dark. "I try to be." They lay quietly. The room was still. After some time he asked, "What are you thinking?" She considered. "Tired," she said. "Confused. A little ashamed." "Of what?" "Everything happened badly. I was pushed from one life into another." He turned slightly toward her, keeping his distance. "You did not do anything wrong." She let out a slow breath. "It does not always feel that way." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let it take time. Nobody is chasing you here." She closed her eyes. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something close to safe. Now, while Eleanor was finding something she had not expected to find, Cassandra was stepping into the life she had fought for. The Calloway wedding was everything she had imagined. Flowers, photographers, a venue in East Nashville that cost more per hour than most people made in a month. Cassandra stood at the center of it and felt, for one long golden moment, that she had one. She was Mrs. Calloway now. She had the name, the family, the address. She had taken what should have been Eleanor's and made it hers. That feeling lasted approximately 72 hours. By the third day, she began to notice things. Bradley Calloway, Brad, as everyone called him, was handsome and well-dressed and said the right things in public. In private, he was a different person entirely. He was not cruel in any obvious way. He was cold. He listened to her the way people listen to background noise. He touched her when it served a purpose and ignored her when it did not. His mother, Virginia Calloway, was worse. She was elegant in the way of women who have spent decades perfecting the appearance of warmth while feeling none of it. Every compliment she gave Cassandra had a small blade inside it. Every smile was measured. And the money that Cassandra had assumed was simply there, like weather. Like gravity, turned out to be a much more complicated situation. The Calloway family had a name. What they did not have, it turned out, was the kind of financial stability that name implied. There were debts. There were business problems Brad had not mentioned. There were hushed conversations that stopped when Cassandra entered rooms. Virginia began asking questions about Gerald Hartwell's pension, his property, his retirement accounts. Casual questions, friendly questions. The kind of questions that were not casual or friendly at all. Cassandra was not stupid. She understood what was happening. She had married into a family that needed her family's money. She had traded herself for a name that was running on fumes. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself Brad would come around. She told herself she had made the right choice. Late at night, when Brad turned his back to her in a bed that cost more than Eleanor's entire wardrobe, one thought kept surfacing. What if her father had been right? Meanwhile, in a valley in eastern Tennessee, Eleanor Hartwell was learning to breathe again. The days had a rhythm she had not expected to find comforting. Early mornings, cold air, the sound of the farm waking up. Dot teaching her things without making her feel ignorant. Nate working long hours and coming home quiet and steady, the way a man comes home when home means something to him. He was patient with her in a way that felt deliberate, not performed patience, real patience, the kind that does not keep score. He gave her space and filled it with small things. A cup of coffee left on the porch rail at exactly the time she came outside each morning. A book left on the kitchen table because he had noticed her looking at the shelf. A question asked at the end of the day. Nothing heavy. "Just what did you think about today?" said in a tone that made it clear he actually wanted to know. Eleanor was not falling in love yet, but she was beginning to trust. And for a woman who had spent 26 years having her trust broken by the people closest to her, that was not a small thing. Then Cassandra came to visit. She arrived with Brad in a black SUV that was too clean for the back roads. She stepped out dressed for a different occasion entirely, looked around the valley with open contempt, and said loudly, "So this is where they sent you." Eleanor said nothing. Dot came out onto the porch. Cassandra looked at her. "And you must be the farmer's mother." Dot said, calmly, "I am Dorothy Calloway. And you are a guest on my property." Cassandra laughed. Brad looked around with the expression of a man who found the whole situation mildly amusing. They came inside. Cassandra moved through the house like an inspector, touching things, commenting on things, making it clear with every gesture that she found the whole arrangement beneath her. Then her eyes landed on the pink diamond piece, sitting in its case on the side table. She stopped. She crossed the room and opened the case. And her face changed. She turned to Eleanor. "Where did this come from?" "It was a gift," Eleanor said. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. "From who?" "From my husband." Cassandra stared at the diamond, then at Eleanor, then at the diamond again. She reached for it. Eleanor moved first. She put her hand over the case. "Do not touch what is mine." Cassandra looked at her with genuine shock. The older sister, who had always stepped back, had not stepped back. Brad moved forward. Dot moved forward. Voices rose. By the time Nate came home, the argument had spilled outside and half the neighboring property had heard it. He walked into the yard, looked at the situation, and looked at Eleanor first. "Are you all right?" She nodded. He turned to Cassandra. His voice was very calm. "You came into my home and spoke to my mother without respect." "Cass," and folded her arms. "I said the truth." Nate looked at her steadily. "Nobody speaks to my mother that way." Brad stepped forward. "Watch your tone, friend." Nate turned to him. "Take your wife and leave." The calmness in his voice was more effective than any raised voice could have been. It was the calmness of a man who did not need to perform authority because he actually had it. Cassandra tried to recover. She said things about the farm, about Eleanor, about what kind of life this was for a woman. Brad made comments about money, about class, about what real success looked like. Neither of them noticed the neighbors who had gathered. Neither of them noticed the way those neighbors were looking at them. An older man named Earl Sutton, who had farmed the adjacent land for 30 years, stepped forward. He said, quietly and without drama, that Nate Calloway had paid for his granddaughter's medical treatment when Earl could not. That Nate had hired 12 people from the valley when the lumber mill closed. That Nate had funded the road repair that allowed ambulances to reach the far end of the county in time. Another neighbor added something, then another. Cassandra stood in the middle of it and felt the ground shift under her. She had expected deference. She had expected these people to be impressed by her name, her clothes, her husband's family. Instead, they were looking at her the way people look at someone who has walked into a room and said something unforgivable. Brad tried to recover with money talk. Earl looked at him and said, "Then let your money teach you some manners first." They left, not with any dignity intact. When the yard was quiet again, Eleanor stood in the middle of it, feeling the sting of what her own sister had brought into Nate's peaceful world. She turned to him. "I am sorry." He frowned immediately. "For what?" "For all of this. She brought this here because of me." Dot came and put a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "She did not bring bad character into this house. She came with it." Nate nodded. "What happened today is not your fault." Eleanor looked at him. "She is my sister." "Yes," he said, "but her choices are her own." Dot looked Eleanor in the eye. You are part of this house now. If anyone disrespects you here, they are disrespecting us. That is not something we allow. Those words settled somewhere deep inside Eleanor. That night they sat outside on the porch steps after Dot had gone to bed. The air was cold and clear and the valley below them was dark except for a few scattered lights. After a while, Eleanor said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For today. For standing up for me. For standing up for your mother," he answered simply. "That is my job." She looked at him. "Your job? You are my wife." The words were so plain, no performance in them, no attempt to be impressive, just the simple statement of a man who meant what he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was also impressed." "With what?" "The way you handled them. You did not raise your voice. But when you walked in, everything changed." He looked out at the valley. "I was angry. I know. If I had said what I wanted to say, it would have gotten uglier." That honesty made her smile. After a while he said quietly, "You are very beautiful." Eleanor looked down at her hands. He said it the same way he said everything, without trying to get something from it, without it being a move. Just a fact he was stating because it was true. She said, "You really do say what is on your mind." "With you, yes." She did not look at him, but she was smiling, and in the dark, so was he. Now here is the part of this story that most people never see coming. Weeks passed. The road project Nate and Eleanor had decided to fund together was moving fast. Real equipment, real workers, real materials. The kind of project that did not announce itself but simply got done. Word reached Nashville. Cassandra heard about it and felt something she recognized as envy, but told herself was concern. She told Brad. Brad's attention sharpened in the particular way of a man who has been looking for an angle. They drove out to see it. They stood on the side of the road and watched the construction, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "This is impossible," Cassandra said finally. Brad said nothing, because he was doing the math, and the math was not adding up to a farmer. A few days later, Cassandra went to their father. She cried. She complained. She painted herself as the victim of Eleanor's new arrogance. She said Nate was probably after the family's assets. She said the inheritance their mother had left, the larger portion of which was meant for Eleanor, should be redirected. Gerald Hartwell, captain of the Nashville Police Department, 31 years of service, a man who had stared down armed suspects and never flinched, looked at his younger daughter's tears and felt himself begin to soften. He called Eleanor. He told her to come for a family gathering. He did not tell her why. Eleanor went, because some part of her still hoped. She arrived to find herself seated away from the main guests, treated like an afterthought, watched with the particular discomfort of people who have done something they know is wrong, and do not want to be reminded of it. Then Gerald called her into his study. The documents were already on the desk. He explained, without meeting her eyes, that Cassandra needed the protection more, that Eleanor was settled now, that the farm was a good life, that it only made sense. Eleanor looked at the papers. Then she looked at her father. "That property was left to me by my mother," she said. "Not by you." His face hardened. "Do not speak to me like that." Then stopped reading me like I have no rights. Gerald stood up. His voice took on the particular authority of a man who had spent 3 decades being obeyed. "You will sign those papers, Eleanor." She looked at him for a long moment. Then Nate stepped into the room. He had not stayed outside. He had known something was wrong the moment they arrived. He looked at the papers on the desk, then at Gerald. "As her husband, I need to understand why you are pressuring her." Gerald looked at him with the open contempt of a man who had already decided what kind of person he was looking at. "This is a family matter. It does not concern you. It concerns me if it concerns my wife." Gerald gave a short, cold laugh. "You are a farmer. You do not have a voice in this room." Nate did not react. He said, "She deserves what is hers." But Gerald still saw what he had always seen. A man from a farm. A man beneath the kind of world he respected. A man Cassandra had already described as suspicious and unworthy. He dismissed him with his eyes. And Eleanor stood there again, facing the truth she had tried to outgrow. Her father could see her pain clearly and still choose Cassandra. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook. She signed. When she set the pen down, she looked at her father, then at her sister. Her voice was calm, final. "From today," she said, "act as if you never had me." The room went still. Cassandra blinked. Gerald frowned. "Eleanor, no." She did not let him continue. "I am done. I have given and kept quiet and forgiven for too long. From today you have only Cassandra. Let it stay that way." She turned to her sister. "You wanted everything. Take it." Then she faced her father one last time. "But do not ever ask me for anything again." She turned and walked out. Nate followed immediately. By the time they reached the car, Eleanor was no longer holding herself together. The tears came hard and quiet. She turned her face away. Nate said nothing foolish. He only stayed close. When they got home, Dot took one look at Eleanor's face and opened her arms without asking a single question. Eleanor went into them like a person who had been holding something heavy for a very long time. Dot held her. "It is enough," she said. "You are home now." That word again. Home. It broke something open. Eleanor cried properly for the first time, not because Cassandra had won, not because the inheritance was gone, but because she finally accepted that some wounds do not come from enemies. They come from the people who should have loved you best. Later, when Eleanor had calmed, Dot went to her room and came back with a wrapped box. Eleanor looked at it. "Open it," Dot said. Inside was a family heirloom. Old, stunning, clearly worth a great deal. The kind of thing not given lightly. "I cannot take this," Eleanor said immediately. Dot held her hand. "You can, Dot. You are not just my daughter-in-law," Dot said. "You are my daughter. This house is yours. You are loved here. You are safe here." Eleanor looked at her, then at Nate, and something settled. Blood had failed her. Love had built her a new family. That truth healed her more than money ever could. Now, while Eleanor was finding peace, Cassandra's victory was rotting from the inside. Brad needed money. The Calloway family name was not paying the bills it used to pay. He came to Cassandra with business problems, then with investments, then with urgent needs that always seemed to require her money and never seemed to produce results. He flattered her when necessary. He lied when necessary. He promised repayment that never came. Inside, he had already made his calculation. Use her, then move on. Cassandra kept giving in. She told herself it was temporary. She defended him when others questioned him. She released money bit by bit and watched it disappear. At the same time, a story was circulating through Nashville society. A mysterious and extraordinarily wealthy man was getting married. A private ceremony, but the guest list was drawing attention. People were talking about the level of investment this man controlled, the land holdings, the business interests, the quiet, almost invisible power. Nobody seemed to know his face. Everyone seemed to know his influence. Brad heard the talk and wanted in. If he could connect himself to that network, maybe the Calloway family could recover. Cassandra wanted the same thing for different reasons. She wanted to be seen again. She wanted people to stop whispering about the Calloway family's finances. Neither of them knew the truth. Eleanor and Nate's formal wedding was approaching. On the morning of the ceremony, Eleanor was sitting with her thoughts when Nate came in wearing a suit. She forgot, for a moment, where she was. He looked entirely different and entirely the same. The same calm eyes, the same quiet way of standing, but dressed in something that made the full weight of who he was visible in a way the farm clothes never had. He smiled when he saw her expression. "What is it?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "You look," he waited. She smiled despite herself. "Too good." He laughed softly. "And you look beautiful enough to make me forget my own name." She looked away immediately, still smiling. The venue was extraordinary. Guests from the farming community arrived with open hearts and genuine warmth. Business associates arrived in expensive cars and careful manners. Nate's assistant, a man named Henry Cole, moved through the space with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to very powerful circles. The staff moved with focused precision. Eleanor saw it all and understood, without anyone saying it directly, that Nate's world was considerably larger than he had ever let her see. Then Cassandra and Brad arrived. The moment they saw Dot and some of the valley neighbors, Cassandra started. She looked around with visible contempt. They let farm people into this kind of event? Brad shook his head. Freeloaders. Some of the neighbors heard. Eleanor stepped forward. Be careful how you speak. Cassandra turned and stopped. She looked at Eleanor in the wedding dress. She looked at the venue. She looked at the guests. What are you doing here? She said. This is my wedding, Eleanor said. Cassandra stared at her. Then she laughed. Your wedding. She looked around again. There is no way that Farmer is behind all of this. The man behind this kind of event is someone powerful. Someone important. Not Henry. Cole stepped forward. Watch your words, he said. You are speaking about my employer. Brad frowned. Your employer? Henry turned slightly toward Nate, who had just approached. Sir, he said, should I have them removed? The words landed like a door closing. Cassandra's face emptied. Brad went completely still. Sir, employer. Everything rearranged itself in an instant. The gold, the diamond, the bank card, the road project, the construction, the guests, the venue. Henry Cole's authority. Nate was not just a wealthy farmer. He was the man everyone in Nashville had been trying to identify. The quiet power behind the investments. The name attached to the land holdings across 3 states. The man no one had been able to put a face to. He had been standing in front of them the entire time. Cassandra looked like the floor had moved. Brad's composure broke completely. Everything they had mocked was greater than everything they had chased. Before either of them could recover, Nate spoke. They were warned before, he said to Henry. Henry nodded. Security stepped in. Cassandra tried to protest. Brad tried to talk. Nobody was listening. They were escorted out in full view of every guest in that room. And inside, while they were removed like people who had forgotten how to behave in decent company. Eleanor and Nate got married. The valley neighbors blessed them with the kind of warmth that cannot be bought. The business guests watched with the particular respect reserved for a man who has earned everything he has. Dot cried openly and did not try to hide it. Eleanor stood beside Nate and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was not standing in someone else's story. This was hers. When he took her hand, it felt steady. When he looked at her, it felt real. Outside, Cassandra and Brad were already turning on each other. Brad blamed her for provoking the situation too many times. Cassandra blamed him for being useless. Old cracks became open fractures. The Calloway family's financial situation could no longer be managed. Brad's business collapsed under the weight of debts he had been hiding. Virginia Calloway's social standing evaporated with the money. And Nate, moving quietly through the same business world that had always protected his privacy, made one decisive move. He cut off the Calloway family's last remaining line of credit. That finished it. Brad's business folded within 60 days. The house in East Nashville went to creditors. The marriage ended in a divorce proceeding that took 11 months and left both parties with considerably less than they had started with. Cassandra Hartwell moved back to her father's house. She was 25 years old, divorced, and living in the room she had grown up in. Gerald Hartwell, captain of the Nashville Police Department, sat across from his younger daughter one evening and looked at her for a long time. He did not say, "I told you so." He was not that kind of man. But he looked at the empty chair where Eleanor used to sit, and he felt something he had spent years refusing to feel. Shame. Not the public kind, the private kind. The kind that comes at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and you cannot pretend anymore. He had spent 31 years upholding the law. He had spent 26 years failing his daughter. He drove to Tennessee. The gate was tall. The compound was wide. Everything about the property spoke of quiet, settled power. The security team informed Eleanor that her father was at the gate. She stood still for a moment. Then she said, "Let him in." Gerald Hartwell walked into that house and looked around at the life his daughter had built. He sat across from her in a room that was warmer and more peaceful than anything he had managed to create. He did not make excuses. He did not explain. He said, "I failed you." Eleanor looked at him. He continued, "I told myself I was being fair. I told myself I was just easier with Cassandra because she needed more managing. I told myself a lot of things. He stopped. The truth is, he said, I looked at you and I saw your mother. And after she died, that was hard for me. So I looked away, and I kept looking away. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I know. He looked at her. I always knew, she said. That was the hardest part. Gerald Hartwell, who had not cried in public since his wife's funeral, sat in his daughter's living room and put his face in his hands. Nate came in quietly unsat beside Eleanor. He did not speak. He did not need to. After a while, Gerald looked up. He looked at Nate. I misjudged you, he said. Nate nodded once. You did. I am sorry for that too. Nate looked at him for a moment. Then he said, she forgave you before you asked. That is the kind of person she is. Gerald looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him, not with the warmth of before. That warmth had been damaged and would take time to rebuild. But with something, with the door open. That was more than he deserved. He knew it. Cassandra came separately, a week later. She sat across from Eleanor, and for the first time in her life, she did not have a performance ready. No tears on demand. No calculated move. Just a 25-year-old woman who had gotten everything she wanted and lost all of it and was sitting in the wreckage trying to understand how. She said, I am sorry. Eleanor looked at her. I do not know if that means anything, Cassandra said. I know it probably does not, but I am saying it anyway. She looked at her hands. I used to think that if I just got the better thing, the better life, the better man, I would feel like enough. I thought that was what was missing. She was quiet. It was never about the things, she said. I know that now. Eleanor said nothing for a moment. Then she said, I know. Cassandra looked up. I always knew what you were doing, Eleanor said. Every time. I just kept hoping you would stop. That landed. Cassandra did not cry. She sat with it. That was the beginning of something. Not a repair. Not yet. Repairs take time and they take work and they are not guaranteed. But a beginning. 3 months after the wedding, Eleanor woke up feeling strange. More tired than usual. A little dizzy. Different in ways she could not name. Dot noticed before Eleanor said anything. They went to the hospital. The doctor ran tests. When the results came back, Eleanor sat very still. You are pregnant, the doctor said. Eleanor looked at her. The doctor said it again. Pregnant. Eleanor's eyes filled before she could stop them. Nate, sitting beside her, went completely still. Then he took her hand and held it tightly. But they said, Eleanor began. The doctor nodded gently. The earlier diagnosis was based on what was visible at the time. Medicine does not explain everything. Sometimes the body heals in ways we do not expect. Sometimes peace does what medicine cannot. Eleanor broke down then, not with pain, with joy too large for her chest. Nate pulled her close right there in that office. His eyes were bright. When they got home and told Dot, the woman laughed and cried at the same time and thanked God out loud in the kitchen for 4 straight minutes. The whole house rejoiced. And Eleanor did not feel like someone watching happiness from the outside. It was hers. The story does not end on the life Cassandra fought for. It ends on something far better. Eleanor Hartwell stood in a life she had never expected. Not the flashy life built on pride. A better one. A husband who protected her and respected her and had chosen her before she even knew she was being chosen. A mother-in-law who loved her without condition or calculation. A community that had made room for her. A child growing inside her. And most importantly, she had broken free from the house where love was always measured unfairly. The girl who was sent away did not end up cursed. She ended up chosen. She ended up whole. And the farmer they all laughed had turned out to be the richest man of all. Not only in money, in everything that actually matters. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere out there, someone is being overlooked by the people who should love them most. And they need to know that being sent away is not the same as being left behind. Sometimes it is the beginning of everything.